to work, but I am ready if Byron, if you and Dr. Thomas are, I'll go ahead and move forward.
I'm ready.
Okay.
I'm ready. I'm having computer issues as well, but I am ready.
All right. Well, we will move forward. It's 6:01 p.m. We'll call the meeting to order. This is our June 1st budget presentation and millage rate hearing. Dr. Thomas, if you would conduct roll call for us.
Yes, ma'am. Let's see, 1 minute, Dr. Kent. I'm sorry, I'm like you, my computer is not doing right. Okay, hopefully I will not omit anyone. Mr. Davis, Miss Gallagher, Mrs. Davis,
Here.
okay, Dr. Yeager, Dr. Gant,
Here.
Dr. Maddox, Dr. Dykeman,
Here.
okay, Dr. Anderson, and Attorney Hull.
Here, and I'll just know that Dr. Yeager is here. I'm not sure if she tried to answer while she was on mute, but I see her here as well.
Thank you.
No problem.
Okay. Thank you very much. So we do have a quorum. Ms. Palmer, is that correct?
Yes, yes, ma'am.
Okay, so we'll move forward to item number 2. That is to amend or adopt the agenda. The floor is open.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, so Ms. Hall made a motion, Ms. Davis seconded it. Are there any questions or is there any further discussion? And to be specific, Ms. Hall, that motion was to adopt the current agenda, right?
That is correct.
Okay, so all in favor of adopting the agenda we have before us, if you would show by raising your hand and saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. If there are any opposed, if you would show by using the same signs. And if there are any abstaining. Okay, so that motion carries. We'll move forward to item 3, and this is our FY 2022 budget presentation. And I'll turn the floor over to you, Dr. Thomas and Mr. Schooneman.
Thank you, Dr. Gant. At this time, we have Mr. Schooneman, who is prepared to share with us our FY 2022 budget and recommendation, and then afterwards we will be able to receive any questions that you all or others might have.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas and Dr. Gant. I thought that I would approach tonight's meeting just a little bit differently. And instead of going through all of these slides, we'd go through the first couple and then jump on over to our actual budget document itself and just look at the budget from a slightly different angle. Given the members that we have on the call tonight, we've all seen this budget presentation more than once. So I just want to stress to anyone watching on YouTube or anyone else that's part of this meeting, if you do want to see the entire budget presentation, all the slides and all of the explanation behind how the budget aligns to the strategic plan, it is on YouTube on our previous budget hearing meeting. I had thought through this process with our last budget meeting, and ideally, if we had additional members of the public on the Zoom call tonight, we have a shared document, and Lisa was going to monitor that chat. And if there were any questions or any comments, we have a shared document that she was going to drop those into. And when we get through the presentation, we're going to flip over to that and then see what those questions are. And if we can respond to them tonight, we will, or we would have. And if we can't, then we'll just have to, we're going to go back, get the answers, and then post it to the budget section of our website before the millage rate is officially adopted hopefully on the 10th.
And Byron, we do have one guest from the public that is in the meeting.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. Okay, so I'm going to jump on over to the actual budget document instead of the slide presentation. Our estimated beginning fund balance. So this is the amount that we are starting the year off with in our bank. I'm estimating it's going to be around $36.5 million. And we always want to put that in terms of a percentage of the following year's budgeted expenditures, just kind of benchmark that to see where we're at. You know, we've established as a board that we want to keep our fund balance at or above 15% throughout the entire fiscal year. And so we're going to close this fiscal year and open up next fiscal year at roughly 20 to 21% of the budgeted expenditures, which is great. One thing I do want to really drive home is because of the payroll shift that we are implementing with the 10-month personnel, which is 94% of all of our personnel paid for out of the general fund. We are shifting their entire payroll calendar back 1 month, and they will all receive double pay in the month of July. And when we do that, the amount that we're starting off in our bank account, that first month, it will not go down just by 1 month's salary and benefits, but 2. And so those first 2 to 3 months, we're actually going to dip below that 15% benchmark that we've established as a good safety net for our school system. Our estimated revenues, the total amount that we're looking at bringing in, $171,151,760. And it's based off of a few assumptions. The first of which, our tax digest, which we're going to go over in a little bit more detail when we go over to our millage rate hearing. It's grown by about 7.6%. And these numbers are pretty firm coming from the tax assessor and the tax commissioner. That 7.6% growth, it's actually made up of 2 components. We've got a reassessment of existing properties at 6%. So that means the properties that were taxed in FY21, the current year that we're in, or the 2020 calendar year, those same exact properties are now worth 6% more. So if we're going to keep our millage rate exactly the same at 20 mills, that means we're going to bring in roughly 6% more revenue when it comes to property taxes. The other component of that growth is just sheer new buildings, new taxable property, and that's 1.6%. So together, 1.6 plus 6 gives you the 7.6% overall growth in the digest. And this budget is built around that 7.6% growth tax at a rate of 20 mils. The other thing to consider, the other big component of our revenue stream is our QBE funding, our quality basic education funding from the state. And just a reminder, we had a 4% decline in student enrollment in this fiscal year, and that's what FY22's funding from the state is based off of. And we compound that 4% decrease in enrollment with the additional $3 million in austerity. So we earn a certain amount through the QBE formula. That doesn't mean the state is going to pay you all of the money that you earn. And so we know going into this next fiscal year, the governor and his budget still has some austerity for all school systems in Georgia. And the amount that is applicable to Clark County is roughly $3 million. So just, although our property taxes and our property tax revenue, we are planning on bringing in more revenue from the property side of things, our revenue stream from the state is decreasing. When you look at it in a pie graph, the state, it's been sitting about 40%. It's a little bit less than it has been in the years past, just due to that austerity amount, not taking last year into consideration. And the property taxes, about 56% of the overall revenues. And then our other sources, we've got TAVT, real and intangible taxes make up the other 4%. Our overall budgeted expenditures for next year is $177,651,760. So what you'll notice about that figure is that it is $6.5 million more than the amount of revenue that we're anticipating. And the way that we are filling that gap is by $6.5 million that we're going to utilize our CARES 2 funding to fill in that gap and provide that additional funding. When it's broken down by function, instructional expenditures account for 64%, and that's kind of a benchmark across the state. You're looking at those instructional expenditures to be roughly around 65%, and our support services account for the other 35%. So in order to run the school system, you've got expenditures that are direct on instruction. For us, that's 64%, and all the other expenditures that it takes to run the school system, roughly 35%. So the other way to look at our budget expenditures is not necessarily by function, but by object. Object is what is it for? Function is what purpose does it serve? And so by object, when we're looking at our expenditures, 85% of all of our expenditures are for salaries and benefits. We are employing 9 board members, 1,319 certified employees, 779 classified employees. So that accounts for 85% of this entire budget, all the personnel that I just mentioned. We also have roughly 1% that are transfers out that are budgeted, and that includes our allocations for ROTC. Although we keep ROTC in a separate fund and we do receive reimbursement from the federal government, we only receive funding for about half of that ROTC program, so we have to budget over and above using general fund money to transfer and cover those additional expenditures with the ROTC program. Similarly, last year, part of the FY21 budget, the year that we're in, the board approved kind of equalizing and normalizing the pre-K salaries, and we're continuing to do that. That budgeted amount has grown from about $430,000 to about $730,000. So our initial and anticipated amount that we were having to kick in to make those pre-K salaries equivalent to other kindergarten and school system employees is costing our district over $700,000. And we also have a small portion to go for a couple employees. I'm sorry, the Better Everyday grants. Those are our local grants for the. I'm drawing a blank. What is it?
LSGT.
LSGT. Boom. Okay. Yeah. So those are LSGT grants, and I think we've set aside roughly $700,000 to allocate to those grants, and we have those set up to transfer out of the general fund because they're kept up within a separate fund that can cross periods. So other than our 85% that we are budgeting for salaries and benefits, and the 1% that's for transfers out, the other 14%, that's our operational expenditures. So that's anything other than salaries and benefits. We've got electricity in there, any kind of contracted services, any kind of instructional materials, all of that is encompassed in that additional 14%. And so looking at it visually, you can see the vast majority, obviously 85%, salaries and benefits, 14% going towards that other operating expenditures. So just another recap, we are budgeting $6.5 million over and above the revenues that we're going to receive. We're closing that gap by utilizing CARES 2 money. We're actually shifting $6.5 million of expenditures away from the general fund to be taken care of by CARES 2 in order for us to have a balanced budget. And the way that we reach that $6.5 million figure, the first is the $3 million in QBE austerity. I had mentioned up here when we're talking about our estimated revenue that the state, through the QBE formula, not only do we have a 4% decline, which is leading to less earned QBE funds, but they're also hitting us with a $3 million of austerity. So the first order of business for CARES 2 is to make us whole when it comes to that austerity amount that was given to us by the state. So we're taking $3 million from CARES 2 to make that happen. And then also the other $3.5 million, whenever you have a 4% decline in enrollment, you earn less funds. And typically as a board, we should be hiring and then also reducing our staffing levels accordingly when either our FTE counts or our full-time equivalent or student counts either go up or down. So typically in any given year, if we saw a 4% decline in enrollment, we would have to think about cutting measures, either really tightening our belt when it comes to the 14% of operating expenditures, or looking at the other 85% of salaries and benefits and seeing how we can trim this budget in order to make our ends meet. Due to COVID, we fully anticipate that 4% to come back to us. You know, the students that we saw the biggest decrease in were in the elementary grades. We had a big drop in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, and third grade. And we really do anticipate, and we're preparing ourselves for those students to return to school. And so the best way to do that is to maintain our existing staffing level across the board. And so to do that, to keep our staffing level the same despite that FTE drop at those lower levels, it's going to cost $3.5 million because that actually equates to, I think it's 41 certified, so teaching positions, and 9 classified positions at the school level. So we're keeping the staffing level at the schools exactly the same, and we're taking $3.5 million from CARES to make that happen. Our ending fund balance, if we started out the year at $36.5 million, we added about $171 million in revenue, and our net expenditures are exactly the same. Our ending fund balance is right where we started out the year at $36.5 million. Once again, close to that 20% benchmark, which is in the safe realm for what we've established as a board. A couple important links here. I've got, if you click on this, it'll bring you directly back to that budget presentation where we go by the additions and initiatives and break it down by strategic priority. And we also talk about initiatives by strategic priority that we're looking at spending CARES and ARPA funds on. So I encourage anybody that's out there that's watching, flip through that budget presentation, and you can also watch the presentation that we gave. It's recorded on YouTube. And then the other very useful tool that we have added this year is this interactive budget dashboard. And if you have a question on how many personnel are budgeted using general fund money at any cost center, at any schools, you can drill down on this interactive dashboard to see exactly how much is spent. So we can, not spent, but how much is budgeted as part of this budget. We want to pick one. We can go to Cleveland Road Elementary. Boom. Okay. So total for Cleveland Road Elementary, $3.7 million. Of that, salaries and benefits, almost entirely made up of salary and benefits. We have operation benefits, or operational budget of roughly $3 million. Now that doesn't mean that's the only operating expenditures that are pegged for Cleveland Road Elementary. It just means the other expenditures are in different cost centers. For instance, electricity, that's all going to be in plant services. It's one big chunk. All of the Fund 150 and consolidated school budgets that we contribute to, those are all consolidated. I think Hope is at 9230, I believe is the cost center. But overall, broken down by cost center, this is a very useful and informative tool. You can also click on positions. And if you wanted to look at how many certified or classified positions are budgeted at any cost center, you can do that as well. So if you want to look at Cleveland Road, we can see that there's a total of 50 employees, and of those 50, we've got 13 classified employees and 37 certified employees. And the breakdown of what those employees do is over here to the right. So overall, just something that's new this year that I really wanted to draw everyone's attention to, because to me, it's very powerful and informative if you're a community member and you want to go and see what we have budgeted without having to, have an open records request or pull down any kind of significant amounts of data. It's just a really useful tool. If you have any questions about this budget, you can always email me. My contact information is down there at the bottom. And now we can actually look at the dollars and cents of this budget and how it's divvied up. This first comparison is our revenues and expenditures compared from FY21, what we had budgeted, to FY22. So if you go and you look at our revenues, you can see right there, property taxes. FY21, we were counting on about $89.3 million in revenue. And what we're budgeting for in FY22 is $94.8 million. That's an increase of roughly $5.5 million or 6.2%. You can go down there and you can look at all of the revenue sources and the percent difference or the dollar amount difference from year to year. Our real estate and other intangible taxes that we have here, there's a slight increase of $95,000, brings us up to $1.5 million. Our TAVT, that's kind of the biggest chunk of the overall other revenue category. And we're increasing that from 4.2 million up to a little bit more than 4.4 million, or an increase of roughly 5.7%. Our transportation fees, we've seen a significant decline in this fiscal year. And we also anticipate somewhat of a decline in FY22. Our investment income is just strictly due to what's available in the marketplace, the treasury bills, those investment utility or investment vehicles that we have an option in saving in. The interest rates have declined significantly, and so the amount of interest that we're anticipating earning as a district has decreased quite a bit. Our indirect cost rates, we increased that by about $200,000, and that just has to do with the percentage of federal program spending. We've got our CARES money, we've got our ARPA money, and whenever we're taking a small piece of that as indirect costs, our federal indirect cost rate, what we're recouping as our own expenses is going to rise. And you can look our QBE earnings, almost $1 million short of what was budgeted last year. Last year we started out the year in terms of austerity with QBE at $7.3 million. This year, much better, but we're still sitting at $3 million of austerity. That's a benefit to CCSD of $4.3 million when you compare it to the prior period. So overall, our revenues, looking at FY21, roughly 162 million, FY22, roughly 171 million. So that's an increase of more than $9 million or 5.7%. Going down to our expenditures, our instructional expenditures are budgeted to increase by 4.4%. And then as you go down the board, the significant differences here, I just want to touch on momentarily, 39.7% business services. And the reason that one is increasing is because we are moving the budget for our enterprise software solution Munis from one category, it was in this general admin section, down here to business administration. And so that's why our general admin is going down for the most part, and our business admin is going up. Down here, you can look at our CARES or ARPA contributions, what we're moving away from the general fund year after year. For FY21, just a reminder, we moved out a little bit more than $4 million. This year, we're going to move out $6.5 million. And then the other way you can fund your ongoing operations is to use your existing fund balance. And so last year, we had opted to use about $2.6 million of our fund balance. So that's what we anticipated losing from our bank account through the course of this fiscal year. We've actually seen just the opposite trend, just due to strong revenues and conservative spending. We're actually going to increase our fund balance. So although we have an approved budget, we are going to eat into our fund balance. We're actually doing just the opposite. So overall, our ending fund balance, like I mentioned, we were starting out at $36.5 million. And after our revenues and net expenditures, we're right back at $36.5 million. The other matrix that we have for you, this really breaks out all the expenditures that you'd see if you went out to that other budget dashboard. You'd be basically looking at all of the cost centers, but this matrix not only breaks it down by cost center, but then for each cost center, what functional category does it hit? And that is where it would land down here on our budgeted expenditures by functional classification. So I'm just going to pause there for a moment. I know I've talked a lot, and before we flip on over to the other sheet, do we have any questions from any board members that we have on the call tonight? Okay, Lisa, I'm going to flip on over to our shared document. And it doesn't look like we've had any additional questions. I'm just going to go down and read a couple questions that were submitted by Carol Aiken. The first one she said is, what is the measure the school board uses to determine millage rates? And the answer that I provided, I said assessed value. So what is the value of your property? Multiply that by 40% to get your taxable value. And then you multiply that by your millage rate, and that's going to give you the amount that you're owed in school tax. So in order to arrive at that millage rate, the first step is throughout the year, the tax assessor is looking at all of the properties in the county and reassessing those values. And by the end of the year, before we get to assessing the millage rates, the tax assessor turns that information over to the tax commissioner, who summarizes it and adds in all of the exemptions, and then transmits that data to the Board of Education. And then as part of the budgeting steps, the budgeting process, we're looking at what our initiatives are, our strategic plan, and what kind of resources we have to push forward our strategic plan, and setting a millage rate to meet those requirements. The second question she asked was, who makes the final decision? And the answer is the Board of Education. We'll have it on the agenda for Thursday's meeting, for Thursday's work session. And then on the 10th, the Board of Education is slated to vote and approve not only this tentative budget, but also set the millage rate. And right now it's being set, pegged at 20 mills, which has been consistent for at least the last 15 years. And the third question she asked is, why aren't elders fixed incomes given a school tax break as in other counties? And I looked at these questions probably about 10 minutes before this presentation. And this is a question that we're going to have to look at the history behind those tax exemptions, what's been proposed in the past, and it will also require some collaboration from board members. And so we'll have to do some research on this question, and before the board votes on that final millage rate, we'll have a response prepared in this document and then posted to the budget section of our website. And the last question is,
Okay.
Would you consider it? And I answered that this is entirely up to the board. It's as a board, something that they would have to not only have the initiative, but also follow through and approve.
Mr. Shinneman, can I ask a question very quickly, just in response to that conversation?
Absolutely.
So just to follow up with that question about reducing the school district's millage rate in order to sort of relax the tax assessment for older families. I guess I'm just not clear on whether or not the actual tax assessment, so what the county charges for your property taxes, does it decrease if the school district says, well, we will not assess 20 mills? Or if the school district says, well, we will provide some leniency for older houses or families residing in older houses or older families residing in houses? Is there, I mean, is there a difference? I guess I'm just not clear on that.
So I think what you're asking is, does the board control those exemptions? Is that what you're saying? Because I see Lisa shaking her head no. I'm trying to put it into context for how I understand the question. So
I think what she was asking was, if the millage rate is reduced, let's say the millage rate is 19, either for everybody or for some subset of people, does that actually reduce the amount of money that those people pay?
I got you. Okay, so the first answer to that is, when you set a millage rate, that millage rate is consistent for all taxpayers. So the only way that your tax bill would come down for the school-related tax is dependent on your exemptions. And so those exemptions, those are going to vary from locality to locality. And then not only that, within your county, the exemptions that apply to the county government and what would apply to the school systems, they may be different. So I don't have all of the information on what types of breaks that our senior citizens may get, or if they don't have, if the assumption is they don't have school-age children anymore. I know other counties have given them a break. I think that's something that we could look into and see how much that would cost the district to approve that type of exemption. And me being the first year in this role, I would have to do some research in order to confidently answer that question.
That would be really helpful, because I think my main question, and Kara, thank you for summarizing what I was trying to say but didn't say so eloquently. My main question is, does our millage rate affect the tax bill that Athens residents get, right? So if we assess 20 or we assessed 17, would it be different? Would the bill be different for our citizens? And I think that there is just a lot of general confusion about that. So perhaps if we could figure out a way to communicate how this would differ if we provided a bit of a tax break, or if we changed our millage rate, how this would differ for the tax bills that people actually get that they have to pay every year, that would be really, really helpful.
I think this is a really good segue into our millage rate hearing. So Dr. Gant, if you don't mind, if there's any other questions about the budget itself, we can transition into the millage rate hearing. And I've got some additional information on the tax digest history, as well as the millage rate and how that's calculated. And I think that might clear up some of these questions.
Okay, sure. If there are no additional questions, we can move forward to item 4, which is the millage rate.
Okay, tonight is the second budget presentation and millage rate hearing that we have. The first one was May 21st. The third and final millage rate hearing will be on June 3rd. So that's this Thursday, and we're going to do that at 5. So we're not going to do the same budget presentation. We're just going to do this second half, which is the millage rate hearing. The tentative millage rate, we have tentatively set it at 20 mills at the board meeting on May 13th, and there's no change from the prior year. We did mention that the reassessment of properties, it produced a tax increase of 5.98% if we keep the millage rate at 20 mills. And in order for it to be a net neutral effect, for there not to be any tax increase, the Board of Education would have to roll back that millage rate to 18.8 mils. And I think that when we approach it, looking at, okay, step 1, the tax assessor assesses all the properties. He turns it over to the tax commissioner, who provides all of the additional exemptions. They give that to the Board of Education to say, hey, here is the overall net digest. Now it's up to the Board of Education to set the millage rate. And when you set the millage rate, there is some ability to increase or decrease that millage rate to meet your budget demands. There's one caveat though, 20 mils is the maximum that is allowable in the state. So the only way that we could go above 20 mils is if we assess property taxes to pay for bonds. It's kind of in lieu of doing a SPLOST. Some counties, instead of the penny sales tax, they will provide, or they will charge an additional millage rate to pay off that long-term debt. So it's just another financing tool that municipalities and school systems have. So once we have that net digest, we're looking at the overall revenue that can be produced at keeping it at 20 mils, or if we rolled it back and kept it at 18.8 mils, what is the revenue associated with the property taxes if we did that? And so really that 18.8 is all of the existing property in the county. Although the value of that property has increased over this past year, if we're looking at the ratio that you're taxing, the percentage that you're taxing, if you keep the millage rate exactly the same, that's considered a tax increase, because the amount of taxes that you're going to bring in is going to increase. So in order to keep the taxing rate neutral, we would have to roll back that millage rate from 20 mils to 18.8 mils. And I've done the math. If we did that, then we would have to find about $5.5 million in additional savings in our budget to make that happen. And just the nature, I kept using the word net. Not all property values increased. Some increased more than others. It's possible, and it's perfectly logical that some even fell in value. So just the nature of property taxes, some property owners, they'll see an increase while others might not see as large of an increase, and some may actually see their property taxes going down. It all is driven by what is the assessed value, and then what is the millage rate that's being set by both the county as well as the school system. And we're keeping ours exactly the same. So if we're if we're proposing to keep ours exactly the same, the only other piece that would change is the value of your property. When we're looking at all of the net property tax digest in the county, that is what we're looking at in this graph. You can see in 2002 to 2009, it grew at a really consistent pace. And then after that Great Recession, it did fall for a few years. And really the past 6 or 7 years, it's really picked up pace and started to grow very strong, almost exponentially, it looks like. I mean, it's really growing very quickly. So 2020, the overall net digest was at 4.5 billion, and now we're at about 4.9 billion. So that increase, like I mentioned, it's made up of those two components. The blue is the reassessment of existing property. It grew at a little bit more than 6%, and then that new growth of 1.5%. And here's the history of our millage rate. So you can see we've kept it at 20 mils every year. And the only thing that has fluctuated is really the overall tax digest. And so because that tax digest has increased, the value of each mill, so each mill that you assess, is increasing year after year. And so if you just do math and you multiply those two together, you get the overall school tax over here. So you can see in 2016, the overall school tax that was assessed by the board, roughly $71 million. This year, the amount that we anticipate as part of next year's budget is $98.1 million. Keep in mind, though, that $98.1 million, that does not include the 2.5% tax commissioner's fee that they withhold. And then also there is a delinquency that needs to be built into there, because not all taxpayers will pay their bills on time. Here is the kind of broken out by category. You can see what the value is of all of the property over the last 5 years. You've got your gross digest. You can see how that has consistently grown. And then you can also take a look at what is the net or the total exemptions on all of the property in the county. And so that it has fluctuated a little bit. It looks like it fell a little bit in 2017 from 2016, and then it has grown year after year, and then just a really modest growth from 2020 to 2021. There's our net digest value. And then we assess that millage rate of 20 mils. It's been consistent. And then this will give you the overall maintenance and operation taxes levied by the school system. You can see, just like in the previous slide, you can see it has grown from 71 million up to a little bit more than 98 million. Down here at the bottom, you can see the year after year tax increase, or the additional amount that we've received as a school system, and then also what that is represented as a percentage. So we're looking at 7.65% from 2020 to 2021. And once again, here's the notes down here at the bottom that in this 5-year history, we're not looking at the net or the 2.5% reduction that's withheld by the tax commissioner, or any kind of potential appeals. They're not going to be reflected in the schedule. And the next thing that I had slated as part of this presentation was turn it over to public comment. But before we do that, I think maybe we should take any remaining questions that we have from board members. And then we can, at that point, Lisa, we can look to see if anybody has their hands raised. I don't know how many people have joined our meeting since we started, but after that we can entertain up to a 3-minute public comment session for each person that would like to address the board. So are there any board members that have any remaining questions?
Mr. Schooneman, did we answer the question that I saw posted by Dr. Yeager? Had that been answered at an earlier session?
Yeah, I had it grayed out just because we had covered that in the previous
Okay.
meeting.
Okay.
Byron, you've already answered my question. Thank you so much. And that was the increase in the taxes based on the assessed value. So thank you for that clarification earlier today.
You're welcome.
I don't have
Mr.
anything, Byron. Oh, sorry.
Could I just ask one last question? I feel like I'm belaboring this because I'm not fully understanding. So if a family is assessed a $2,000 tax bill, does our millage rate, if it's 20 mil or 18.5 mil, does not impact the family's tax bill of $2,000? What it does impact is the proportion of that tax bill that goes to the city or county versus the school district. Am I saying this right?
So
I just want to make sure I fully understand this.
Sure, absolutely. On the tax bill, there are two components of your tax bill. So there are two taxing authorities that are going to set their own millage rate based off of somewhat similar net digest. You know, like I had mentioned that we may have some exemptions that the county doesn't, and the county may have some that we don't. But overall, I mean, it's roughly, it's very close. But, you know, we both have the autonomy to set our own millage rate to meet our own budget needs. So the tax bill that's received by that family, it's going to have those two components. So what we're looking at setting in this millage rate, that has a direct impact on what the bill is for that family. So if we set it at 10 mils, I mean, I'm just throwing out something there, 10 mils instead of 20 mils, their tax bill would be half of what it would be for the school tax portion. Not the whole thing, but whatever is applicable to the school tax would be 50%. So what you're voting on directly impacts what's on that family's their tax bill.
Understood. Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
All right, I think that just threw me back into confusion. Okay. We'll have to talk again because I truly understood that the assessment was, I think the millage rate is a consideration for the assessments, right? But it's based on the current millage rate. Is that right?
So I think maybe what's happening is we're getting mixed up in the terminology. Maybe I've loosely used the word assessment.
Yeah. But
So
anyway.
that's probably on me. The first part is the tax assessor, they set the value of all the property. So that is, to me, let's just say that is their valuation of the property.
Right.
After we receive that valuation, we can look and say, how much revenue would the school system collect if we tax that net digest at 20 mils? How much tax revenue could we obtain if we set that at 18.8 mils? And we can kind of, we can do that dance in order to meet what our budget needs are. Does that answer your question? I try to do it without using the word asset. Really, after we get the values, we're looking at the millage rate and then assessing the tax based off of what millage rate.
And you're using the word assessing again. So once we get the value from the county, this is how I understand it, and I don't want to confuse it further. I understand it that we then will, based on our vote of a 20 mil 20 mil assessment, I'll call that, for the school district taxes, that gets applied to the property as it was appraised by the county. And that
Correct. That's absolutely
determines
correct.
our portion of the taxes. But it doesn't force the county to go back and raise the taxes or decrease the taxes based on our 20 mills or our 10 mills.
Yeah, we're completely independent. So we, the Board of Education sets their own millage rate and the county sets theirs. And they both do so after they get the value from the tax assessor.
Okay, great. Thank you. I think I'm clear again.
And the individual's tax bill has a component that goes to the county government, and a component of our tax bill goes to the school system. And those amounts are dependent upon what the millage rate of those individual entities are, right?
Well said. Yes.
And so if my home is valued at less this year than it was last year, and Clark County stays at a 20% millage rate, the portion that I have to pay on my tax bill that goes to Clark County could be less than I paid last year, but it's based on the valuation of my home as determined by the tax assessor. If the tax assessor values my home at $500,000 this year, and it was valued at $485 last year, even if Clark County stays consistent at a 20 mil rate, the amount that I pay in taxes to the Clark County School District portion would be more than it was last year, even though our millage remained stable, because the assessed value of my home went up. I'm doing a lot of up and down. Is that right?
Well said.
Okay. Did that help, Dr. Anderson?
It did, and I think what the huge confusion is, and I've heard this a lot throughout, many years, is that what we assess for the school district increases our taxes, our property taxes. And what I'm hearing in this conversation, and what I've tried to get clarity on in the past, is that our millage rate is set based on the current value of the property taxes. So it's not like if we set our millage rate at 20% now and do it at 20% next year, that the property taxes in this county will go up. It's just that the millage rate will stay the same. And so we assess 20 mills from that property value that has already been established by the tax assessor. So that narrative is not very clear for community members. It's not clear for me. And so I just really needed that clarity.
And it could go down, right? It may go down. Like, I think maybe the value on our home may have gone down this year. And so the amount, even though the millage rate stays at 20, the amount that my husband and I will pay this year to Clark County is less than we paid last year, because the value of our home went down. So even though Clark County's established millage rate stayed the same, because our home value went down, then that percentage is less than it would have been last year. Is that right?
That's correct. And I highlighted this on here, and it says some property owners will see an increase and some won't. And it is strictly dependent. If we keep it at 20 mils, it's strictly dependent on their assessed value from one year to the next.
Yeah, and I think that really does call the question that Mrs. Aiken had in the beginning of this conversation about the home values, property taxes, and what the school assesses. I think there's a community belief that when the school district assesses a 20 mil rate consistently, that it causes an increase in property taxes, when that's not the case. We're just assessing within that property tax value that's already been determined. And I don't think that narrative is very clear, is all I'm saying.
That's part of the conversation that I had earlier today, Dr. Anderson, too. And so I think that, especially when, and I never mind, I won't bring that up. We'll talk offline about that.
I just had one comment about that. I think that maybe part of the confusion has to do with, because we have the opportunity or the option to change the millage rate each year, and 20 is the highest that we can go. In a given year, if you tax at 20 mils, that's always going to cost people more than if you had set it at 18 mils, right? So the millage rate that you choose for a given year, even though the properties have already been assessed, people will pay more if you set it at 20 versus if you set it at 18. And then the other thing I was going to say is, because I know that we talked about this early on in the budget process, we had talked about maybe this year lowering the millage rate from 20 down to something else. And we thought that perhaps this was a year that we would be able to do that. But I think that I remember you saying that one of the big reasons we couldn't do that this year was because of the payroll shift, right? Was that one of the big contributors to that, so that we could get our employees on a better pay schedule?
That's exactly right. So like I was going to note, or just kind of expand on two things that you mentioned. As long as we keep it at 20 mils and the value of the properties increase, then there will be technically a tax increase every year. And so every year that you see the blue, going up, as long as we kept it at 20 mils, it's technically framed as a tax increase. Now, the years where it fell in value, we kept it at 20 mils, and that would technically be a tax decrease. We kept it at 20 mils, but we can't tax more than 20 mils. So we went back even further than what the rollback rate would have been in those years. So our revenue has risen and fallen lockstep with the assessed or the value of the properties. That was one. And then I forgot the other thing I was going to mention. What was your second point, Dr. Dykman?
I was talking about the
okay, I got it now.
Reducing it this year.
So when, and I really think this should be the goal every year, is to look at potentially rolling back the millage rate and being conservative. So that's just the approach that I took, is, hey, if we can do it, we really need to investigate rolling back the millage rate. And so one of our strategic plan elements in one of the big things that we need to do for our system is realign our payroll calendar. And when we do that, when we move 94% of the employees that we have in the general fund and pay them twice in 1 month to realign that payroll calendar, it is going to reduce our fund balance, or reduce the amount of cash that we have in our bank by over it's almost $11 million from month to month. So really, we can't have both. So whenever we're building this budget, we could have either said, we can one time, give a tax break this year, but at the same time, we wouldn't have been able to afford that payroll shift. And so really, that is, in my mind, the main reason why we are having to continue the 20 millage rate assessment of tax, is to help us navigate that payroll shift. Okay, it looks like Hope is leaving. As long as there's no additional questions from any board members, Lisa, are there any community members on at the moment?
I don't see any questions or any hands up. I only see one left on here right now.
Okay.
So no.
Okay, so this would be the time frame. The intention of these meetings is to really get community feedback, and it is designed to give them an open forum to express how they think and feel about our budget and our millage rate, what we're setting the millage rate at. And so I was going to give each person that wanted to speak 3 minutes to address the board at this time. And
Byron, the Miss Aiken is on here and she does have a question. I don't know if she wants to ask that now.
It's in the chat.
Yes. She asked, is it going to be a constant to stay at 20 mil?
yes, it is consistent for the last 15 plus years.
And I think you already shared with us that the cost to stay at 20 mils would be a reduction of about 5 million from our current budget as it's been proposed. Is that correct?
So if we utilize the rollback rate, so part of the calculations that we get from the tax commissioner, you're looking at, hey, what was the property values for 2020? And what was your millage rate? And then what is the property values in 2021? You'll have to set a reduced millage rate because the values went up in order to have a neutral tax. I guess the way our lawmakers would look at it is if you don't reduce the millage rate from 20 mils down to 18.8, then it's technically a tax increase. So if we did reduce it from 20 mils down to 18.8, it would be a little bit more than $5 million in property taxes that we would forego and have to adjust our budget.
Thank you.
And just to be clear, you said it is a constant 20 mils. It stays that way for the whole year, but you also said that every year you look at it to determine whether it can be reduced.
That's exactly, yeah. So that's part of the budgeting process. And I really feel like that is where each CFO and each Board of Education needs to start, is looking at, you want to be conservative and be good stewards of the taxpayer dollars, but then at the same time, you want to make sure that our strategic plan and our mission and vision are funded appropriately. And so we try to balance our budget with also being conservative when it comes to the tax assessment. And so we did start off this budget by looking at, hey, can we afford rolling the millage rate back? What would that cost the district? And you had mentioned it before, the big driving factor for keeping it at 20 mils this year is the readjustment of all of the 10-month personnel salaries.
Okay, thank you. Back to the agenda.
Okay, Dr. Gant and Dr. Thomas, unless there's any other questions, that's all I have.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Thomas and Mr. Schooneman.
She had one more question. She said, you said 20 mil is max and has been for 15 years. My question is giving retirees on fixed income consideration.
And we have that in our shared doc. I can get to it if I can navigate past this here. Ms. Aiken,
Mr. Schooneman, that's one of the areas that you mentioned that we would be up for discussion from the board. I know there has been considerable discussion around this area in the past and some mixed feelings among board members regarding this recommendation, but I do know that it has been discussed in the past. Maybe it seems like it was recently, but it was probably a year ago when we had this discussion. But I noticed that you did put it in this matrix. And so, Ms. Aiken, this is something that we will definitely, Mr. Schooneman, I think you said that you would have to do some research on and then bring that back to the board for discussion. Is that correct?
yeah, I would like to see, you know, at what point, what years this was analyzed by the board. The other thing that I can do is we can talk to Tony Meadows, the tax commissioner, and she can give us an estimate rather quickly on, hey, how much revenue would the system have to forego to give a tax break to senior citizens of you know, X number of mills. I'm not entirely certain how they calculate that tax break, because I think you've got options there. You know, you don't have to say if you are over 65, then your school tax goes to 0. I think you can also say that you know, it would give you a certain mill or mills or dollar amounts off, similar to your homestead exemption, where you've got, you know, a reduction in your home value by $2,000. So I think there's multiple approaches to it, but I can talk to Tony Meadows and have her come up with what it would cost with various options, just for us to look at as a board and see if that's an avenue that y'all are interested in going down.
And I want to confess, because that you're right, every single year that we do the budget, this question comes up. And so for 8 years, I've heard it. And so I do know that there is some exemption for over, I believe, age 62, and you don't have to do anything to apply for that. That part I do remember. And so that's the extent of what I remember. Your other question about being able to reduce it further, again, exactly what that exemption is and what that reduction would be, I would really appreciate it if if you would research that and make sure that we can actually put it in writing someplace, because every year I go through the same thing in my mind. And I know that I've looked at my tax bill, and my school taxes haven't changed over time since I turned 62. So there I know that there's something that happens, and I didn't do anything to make it happen. So
I'll do that, and we'll have something put together before the millage rate is voted on and approved, not this Thursday, but next Thursday.
that would be great.
All right. Dr. Thomas and Mr. Schooneman, does that conclude your the budget and millage rate report?
Yes,
Yes, ma'am.
ma'am, it does for me. I was looking at what Dr. Anderson had posted. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. Are there additional questions and suggestions?
I put that in the spreadsheet,
Mhm.
her statement.
Oh, okay. Let me see if I can.
It was just asking about simulations for various scenarios to see how, I'm assuming, different millage rates would impact a tax bill.
Okay. Is that something that the board or the quorum here, is there a consensus around that? I'm thinking of the timeline that we have. And so the most efficient use of that timeline, I know that our next meeting, I think, is millage rate. So it certainly would fall under that. But I also just want to be sure that if others on the call would find that useful. Dr. Dykeman and Ms. Davis.
I was just going to say, I think it would be useful to, in terms of the question about maybe having adjustments for senior citizens or retirees or people without school-age children or whatever it is. I think that'd be useful to know, but I don't know that that would be something we could do. That's not something we could do this year anyway. So for me, that question wouldn't have to be answered prior to next week. If Dr. Anderson is asking about just simulations for different millage rates, I think that's probably something that Mr. Schooneman can do pretty easily, calculating the different millage rates, but he could answer that, I guess.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. I'm just trying to be sure, we want to be sure that we have enough information to make informed decisions. And then we also want to be sure that I don't know what Mr. Schooneman and Dr. Thomas's timeline is between now and is it next Thursday? I think it is. And so I want to be sure that it's something that is practical and feasible for the staff, or if this is, you know, if this is something that will be at next week's presentation that we can expect, if that's realistic, or if this is an individual conversation with Ms. Hall and Dr. Anderson. So I'm just wanted to get some clarification before since we do have a quorum here, some general consensus. Mr. Schoeneman?
To say, I'll be happy to, I'll have to work with Tony Meadows on this. And if it's something rather simple that we can put together in terms of an estimate, I can put it out in our Friday, board update. That might be something that you could look at, and if it's not ready by this Thursday, at least have some time to digest and look at before the vote next Thursday. And I think, like Dr. Dykman said, even if it's something at this stage in the game, it might be too late to entertain a vote on approving some sort of break for citizens over 62 or 65, or increasing that. I think it's still useful information to have, just to kind of cost out what would be the cost to the district and the benefit to the residents of our county. So I think it's useful work to be done no matter what.
Absolutely. I think it would be very useful. So I think what I hear you saying is that you'll try to have this you'll meet with Ms. Meadows and try to have this for a board update. But if not, then that information will be shared next week, or when you all are able to actually get the exact information that Dr. Anderson has requested.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, Dr. Anderson and Ms. Hall, is that okay? Would that be okay?
Yeah, that's fine. And I really do apologize for being the new person who just doesn't know what I don't know. So I am sincerely apologetic.
No, I don't think you have to apologize. These are all good
Oh,
questions.
absolutely. And I'm interested in that same information,
Yeah.
because every year we go through this same
Yeah.
scenario. And so I think, again, it's one of those things that would be easily explained if we can just put a document together that people can reference. So totally trying to not rely on my memory on this one, but thank you so much for asking those questions, because that's truly how I get beyond my one course in accounting.
Yeah, I think these are great questions. And it gives us, as much information as we can to make informed decisions. And even if we, just depending on what happens over this next week, but also to look to the future as far as what those goals are, those financial goals as it relates to our strategic planning and things like that over the next year. So please don't ever apologize for asking questions. I just wanted to be sure that this is something that's practical, that's doable, and just trying to assess what that workload would be and if it would be possible given our timeline right now, and if there was general consensus so that we could prioritize it. So thank you, Dr. Anderson, for those questions. Are there any additional information, Dr. Thomas, Mr. Schoeneman, or Ms. Palmer, from the public?
I think we're good. We appreciate everyone's input and questions, and I will work with Mr. Schoeneman to get those scenarios out to you all as quickly as possible.
All right, well, if there are no additional questions or if there's no additional feedback, we'll move to our last item, which is adjournment. The floor is open.
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Okay, Ms. Davis made a motion, Ms. Hull second. I don't see any